Okay, colleagues, je déclare cette réunion.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 110 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Pursuant to the order of reference Monday, April 24th, 2023, the committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-27, an act to enact the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, the Personal Information Data Protection Tribunal Act, and the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, and to make consequential and related amendments to other acts. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today. We have the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television and Radio Artists, Eleanor Noble, the National President, with Mary Kelly, the National Executive Director. We also have the Association Nationale des Éditeurs de Livres, Stéphanie Hinault, the Director of Legal Affairs. Representing the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, Marie-Julie Desrochers, its Executive Director. We also have with us the Directors Guild of Canada, represented by Dave Forget, the National Executive Director, as well as Samuel Bischoff, Manager, Policy and Regulatory Affairs. Finally, we have, of Music Canada, Patrick Rogers, its Chief Executive Officer. Thanks to all for being with us this morning.
Good morning, as we're nearing the end of this study on Bill C-27, and you're generating, as I see already, a lot of excitement in the room. So thanks for making the time to enlighten us with your testimony and your answers to our questions today. And without further ado, we can start with Madame Noble for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good morning. I'm Eleanor Noble, the National President of ACTRA, the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television and Radio Artists. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee on behalf of 30,000 members of our union. With me today is Marie Kelly, our National Executive Director, and she's here with me to address any questions you may have. For 80-plus years, ACTRA has represented professional performers across Canada who bring Canadian stories to life. We play a vital role in a nearly $14 billion industry that generates 240,000 jobs a year. We came to this committee today because we are concerned about the use of artificial intelligence and similar technologies in our industries. To be clear, there are some positives to the adoption of technology in our industry when used responsibly. That said, our members are increasingly concerned about the unbridled and unmitigated use of AI in our industry and outside of it that has the potential to significantly and harmfully impact our ability to work and make a living in the screen industry. Last year, we undertook a comprehensive survey of our members about the impact of AI. Outside of collective bargaining, we have never had more responses to a member survey. Let me share with you some of the high-level takeaways. 98% of ACTRA performers are concerned about the potential misuse of their name, image, and likeness by AI. 93% of respondents are concerned that AI will eventually replace human actors, beginning with background work and dubbing. We have seen real examples of harmful use already. It was brought to ACTRA's attention last year that one of ACTRA's minor performers, underage performers, was uploaded to an AI text-to-speech voices list on a public website, which allowed users to manipulate her voice to say crude, R-rated things. This is a minor, I'll remind you. This is unacceptable. Similarly, an ACTRA performer on a video game was downloaded by players. And with the use of AI, their voice and game character were manipulated to say obscene things and to perform sexual acts, all without the knowledge or consent of the actor. This was accessible online for 2 years before the actor became aware, at which point ACTRA was contacted to step in. These are just 2 examples of the harmful manipulations that performers and, frankly, many Canadians face. I think that we can agree as Canadians that these are extremely harmful violations. You have an opportunity to take action in this bill to protect us, and we are asking you to do so. We are pleased that the government is reviewing the impact of AI in a multifaceted manner. We believe it's important to update the privacy regime in Canada, and to put a framework in place to ensure AI developers and deployers must take action to mitigate the potential for harm from their technologies. We want to congratulate the government on bringing Bill C-27 forward, and in particular, we support your intention to ensure that consent is required for the use of biometric information, including a performer's name, image, and likeness. Clarity around informed consent, we hope, will help in work to ensure the industry does not ambush performers into signing away their rights. This committee must push this bill further to clarify the type of harm performers experience on all too regular a basis. Not only is AI causing personal harm to performers like me, it also risks our livelihoods and reputations. In the entertainment business, our reputation, including our name, image, and likeness, is all we have. We are the brand which we protect. The difference between getting a job one day and not getting one the next can come down to the most minute things, including one's reputation. Sadly, reputational harm is not currently encompassed by Bill C-27. The definition of harm to include psychological harm or economic loss to an individual does not sufficiently encompass the reputational harm we experience. Due to the nature of our business, we might not be able to show an exact circumstance of lost work due to a deep fake or manipulation, but there is no doubt that damage to a performer's reputation means real and tangible loss for our careers. We have submitted to this committee our proposed language to rectify this gap under the legislation. We strongly urge this committee to amend the definition of harm to ensure that performers' rights are protected under this bill. Finally, the government must take action to amend their statutes to mitigate the harm of AI on Canadian performers. Specifically, we believe that the Copyright Act is fundamentally biased against performers by not ascribing a moral right to their work. We urge this committee to take action either through this bill or with haste elsewhere to protect Canadian performers. We understand that the upcoming budget bill may contain amendments to the copyright, and we ask that you raise with the Minister of Finance the urgency of the need to provide moral rights to its performers, as musicians have. Committee members, we recognize that this bill is only scratching the surface of the public policy tools that the government has on this file. We urge you to take us seriously. Our sector is an economic driver in this country, with real workers who strive to make a living and contribute to our Canadian cultural life. We need you, as legislators, to ensure that we can be protected and we can continue to work today and into the future. Thank you. Marie and I would be happy to take any of your questions.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Noble. Ms. Hinault, the floor is yours. Thank you. On behalf of the Association Nationale des Éditeurs de Livres, I thank you for having us testify as you study the very first legislation to specifically regulate AI-empowered systems in Canada. I'm Stéphanie Hinault. I am Director of Legal Affairs of an association that brings together the country's French language book publishers. Together with the association representing authors in Quebec, UNEC, we've set up Copybec, a reproduction rights collective that offers users and rights holders solutions in managing their rights and royalties. Associated with the largest federation of publishers associations in the world, the International Publishers Association, we promote publishing as a vector of economic, cultural, and social development and remain at the cutting edge of its evolution through our collective presence at key international fairs and trade shows, by welcoming foreign publishers, booksellers, and journalists to our country, and through numerous projects that support the profession. We step up our efforts to promote Canadian French language books. For example, we co-created l'Entrepôt de Livres Numériques, Annelle de Marque, a digital book depository, which has enabled the successful development of a business model complementing the print model. We support our members in implementing digital strategies to promote market growth, including lending in public libraries and schools, and so forth. So, in concrete terms, we are promoting the book and books in all formats in French-speaking countries and encouraging translation in Argentina, China, Egypt, Germany, Mexico, Iceland, Spain, Sweden, Serbia, Turkey, and the United States, to name but they. The more Canadian literature becomes known internationally, the more readers it attracts, the more it's noticed by juries, the more awards it wins, and the more it sells on every continent, including in Canada. Here are a few figures illustrating the success of Canadian French language books. In Quebec alone, sales of new books represent an annual market of around $680 million. And still in Quebec, the market share of French language publishers is still 50% of sales, despite some 900 foreign publishers distributing their books there. In the age of AI, the Canadian book sector as a whole needs, more than ever, to be supported by its government, updating policies and programs, and encouraging its legal content offering. That's why we actively participated in ISDE's recent consultation on generative AI and copyrights in support of the responsible development of AI with Access Copyright, Association of Canadian Publishers, the Association des éditeurs de langue anglaise du Québec, Canadian Authors Association, Canadian Publishers Council, COPIBEC, Literary Press Group of Canada, Regroupement des éditeurs franco-canadiens, the Writers' Union of Canada, and UNEC, as well as other partners within CDEC, the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. The global publishing industry relies on copyright, in particular the exclusive right to authorize or prohibit the use of works and to grant licenses in return for remuneration. These rights are engaged when works are incorporated into AI systems and when these systems are used to reproduce the works. For their owners, the ability to grant permission or not to make these uses is as important as the compensation that may result from it, particularly when the production of the AI system competes with the work, replaces it, or infringes the author's moral rights, to name but a few major issues. In the United Kingdom, Europe, and the North American market in general, we're seeing an increase in copyright infringement. Just give me a moment. Against AI models or commercial agreements to license content for text and data mining. In Canada, this licensing market is nascent. It's just beginning. We implore you to encourage management of it by amending Part 3 of Bill C-12 to clearly state that AI must be developed and deployed responsibly. First, by applying procedures to ensure compliance with copyright legislation when AI trains its AI models and systems. Second, by ensuring that transparency obligations are respected, such as publishing and making available information on the content integrated into their systems. And third, by stating in their own license conditions with their users that they are obliged to respect copyrights and that they do so in plain language. In the event of an infringement involving an AI developer, supplier, or user, the Copyright Act provides rights holders with the remedies for managing an infringement, but upstream the legislation governing AI must, at the very least, state the need to respect intellectual property in Canada. Otherwise, the Canadian rights market is likely to be even more negatively affected, while systems are developed and deployed in an opaque, unfair, and illegal manner. I hope this is clear. We're not against the use of artificial intelligence, but we maintain that all players in the Canadian market must support the legitimate interests and essential contributions of authors and publishing houses to the country's innovation, knowledge, culture, diversity, influence, economy, and wealth. We therefore urge you to ensure that our country complies, at the very least, with international practices that do respect authors and publishers, as Europe is now ensuring is the case with its new AI law, to prevent Canada from being seen as a sort of banana republic of the technology world. In closing, allow me to point out that authors and publishers count on you to improve the Copyright Act, without which they will not be able to receive the legitimate royalties that their international counterparts now receive when their works are reproduced in certain educational establishments, and to remind you that this priority is supported by your Standing Committee on Science and Research in its November 2023 report on supporting the commercialization of intellectual property. On behalf of our Association Nationale des Éditeurs de Livres, the International Association of Book Editors, thank you for listening. I'm available for answer questions. Thank you so much, Ms. Hainaut. Ms. Desrochers, over to you. Dear members of the committee, thank you for this invitation to appear before you and for giving the cultural community its first opportunity to comment on Bill C-27. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. We represent over 50 members, unions, professional associations, and management groups from Canada's French and English-speaking cultural sectors. We cover a wide range of disciplines: audiovisual, music, digital arts, publishing, visual arts, and performing arts. We represent more than 350,000 creators and 3,000 cultural businesses across the country. I'm in good company today with the three members of the coalition appearing before you: the Association nationale des éditeurs de livres du Québec, the Directors Guild of Canada, and the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists. This small group illustrates only one aspect of the effects of artificial intelligence on our sector. Thus, I invite you to continue consulting the sector to hear representatives of visual artists, scriptwriters, producers, composers, authors, and so forth. Our coalition's primary mission is to ensure that a cultural exception is included in trade agreements in order to preserve Canadian cultural sovereignty. We also work to ensure that Canada adopts public policies that protect and promote the diversity of cultural expressions, including in the digital environment. Our actions are always based on the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, which came into effect thanks to the concerted efforts of Quebec and Canada. Indeed, Canada was the first country to ratify it. We're here to comment on a bill designed to protect Canadians from the risks posed by the meteoric development of artificial intelligence, in particular, but not exclusively, generative intelligence. The 2005 Convention states that cultural diversity, and I quote, flourishes in a framework of democracy, tolerance, social justice, and mutual respect between peoples and cultures, end quote. The latter being indispensable for peace and security at the local, national, and international levels. The development of responsible artificial intelligence must take this into account and must take diversity into account. This is essential for safeguarding our freedom of expression, the health of our democracy, and for our sovereignty. Bill C-27 essentially deals with risks to individuals. As others have said before us, we too stress the importance of taking into account the societal risks it poses. The objectives of the Act, at Article 4, for example, or the definition of harm in the text, are too narrow. Adopting the wording found in the European Union's AI Act, we suggest that one of the objectives of C-27 should be to, quote, protect health, safety, the fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and the interests of society, end of quote. And I remind you that cultural expression is a pillar of that. And the protection against harmful effects of artificial intelligence systems is the aim of that approach. The main theme of today's table is copyright. This is gratifying since we are convinced that Bill C-27 has a major role to play in this area. Recently, the Government of Canada held a consultation on the impact of generative AI on copyright. The cultural community is unanimous. Contrary to widespread perception, the Canadian Copyright Act does not need to be modernized in any major way to protect rights holders in response to developments in AI. In fact, it already protects human creations and works and prohibits the unauthorized use of protected cultural content. However, due to the lack of transparency regarding the data used to feed AI systems, the Act fails to be effective. This is where C-27 can help. In addition to the suggestions we have just made regarding the importance of recognizing the fundamental nature of the diversity of expressions, we have identified concrete avenues for actions on the bill that would enable the Copyright Act to gain its full effectiveness. Inspired by the European AI Act, we need to go further than an obligation to keep data registers, as added by amendment to Article 7.2. A sufficient detailed summary of the use of training data protected by copyright must also be made available to the public. That's what should be added. Second, there must be a clear reference to the data required to implement the Copyright Act. The accountability framework Article 12.5 must therefore include policies and procedures concerning the Copyright Act and the use of an individual's voice, image, or reputation. These additions would enable rights holders and artists to consent or not their data being used to train AI systems, and would make it possible for a licensing market to emerge that would encourage adequate remuneration. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much, Ms. Desrochers. Now, Mr. Forget, you have the floor.
Committee, good morning. Thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to participate in this important work. My name is Dave Forget, the DGC's National Executive Director. With me today is Sam Bischoff, Manager of Policy and Regulatory Affairs. We appreciate the committee's invitation. Generative AI threatens the ecosystem of creativity on an existential level. Creators should have the right to consent and be compensated whenever an AI entity uses their copyrighted content. As we stand at the crossroads of regulating AI to protect against harms, we believe it is crucial to protect creators from the economic and moral harms under ADA. The Directors Guild of Canada is a national labour organization that represents over 7,000 key creative and logistical personnel in film, television, and digital media industries. Today, it includes over 1,000 director members working across the country on screen-based programming. The Canadian film and television sector generate massive amounts of value, employment, and soft power. In 2021-22, the entire screen sector value chain directly contributed an estimated 337,000 jobs, as well as $16.6 billion in labour income and $23.3 billion in GDP to the Canadian economy. However, artificial intelligence threatens the core of this ecosystem. Large language model developers are reproducing extensive amounts of creative works for commercial purposes without the authorization and fair compensation of authors. Copyright remains a central framework law for governing our industry. Any unauthorized copying to train AI models is theft. Moreover, it's very difficult for rights holders to know when their works have been used without their consent in training AI models. Creators should be able to control whether their works are copied and used for mining purposes in the first place. Transparency in AI systems must be a prerequisite to defending author rights. This is a fundamental element to secure a future where human creativity can flourish. In its current form, ADA is failing to protect and uphold fundamental copyright principles. We need ADA to do the following, consistent with protections being provided to creators under the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, also known as EU AIA. 1. Confirm that the use of copyright-protected content requires the authorization of the rights holder. This would be subject to the limited exception in copyright for technical ephemeral copying, which represents Canada's very limited exception for text and data mining activities to the extent it applies. 2. General-purpose AI systems like ChatGPT must be transparent about the materials used for training purposes. They should provide a description of information on the data used for training, testing, and validation, as well as how this data was obtained and selected. And 3, providers of general-purpose AI models must be required to put in place a policy to respect Canadian law on copyright, including obtaining consent for text and data mining purposes. Any provider that makes available a general-purpose AI model in the Canadian market should comply with this obligation, regardless of the jurisdiction in which the AI training takes place. Sam?
Our European counterparts were able to secure these crucial rights to protect their cultural industries. There should be no reason why the governments cannot provide the same level of protections in Canada. The large, well-funding platforms like Google, OpenAI, and Microsoft should be required to operate on the same playing field in Canada as they will have in the European Union. The Canadian governments must ensure that creators are fully empowered to exercise their rights and make informed decisions. We believe that unlike the provisions of the EU AI Act that include an opt-out regime associated with a text and data mining exception, Canadian creators and right holders should benefit from an opt-in system to license their works. An AI tool cannot originate artistic work or supplant human creativity, and the value of creativity is not captured nor understood by the AI processes. Despite claims by the operators of these tools that their use is transformative, the reality is quite different. Generative AI tools do not genuinely transform, but instead exploit and launder the creative works they mine. It is imperative that authors receive fair compensation for use of existing works and for all future uses. Members of the committee, we thank you for your time and will be pleased to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much. And now at last, Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss Bill C-27 with you from the perspective of Canada's major music labels. Creating the rules of engagement for AI comes at an important time for the music industry, both here at home and abroad. I want to say off the top that our industry is already making use of positive elements of AI as a tool to help artists make more intriguing and interesting music, and using it, again, as a tool to help connect artists, including Canadian artists, with fans all around the world. Those aspects are, of course, not the central domain of C-27 or the need for further regulation. I will dedicate the rest of my time to where you can help us most. Like a generation before with illegal downloading, the use and ownership of music is a valuable canary in the coal mine. Since then, we've learned the importance of regulating technology for its practical and common use, rather than building exceptions into our laws and economic frameworks for corner cases. We've learned that the value of music and other forms of creative expression cannot be sacrificed to the drumbeat of technological revolution, and we've learned that quality, safe, licensed music is as popular with music fans as it is to the artists who are paid when their music is played. That is why Music Canada is supportive of the efforts made in C-27 regarding the regulation of generative AI. There are 3 places that we would encourage you to go even further. The first is the need for AI developers to maintain and make available records of the material that was ingested and used for training. Much of the economic frameworks for the industries that will be affected by the further flourishing of AI require everyone to understand what the AI is trained on. In order to truly understand that, developers must keep these records. You will hear from the most excited proponents of unharnessed technology that this request is somewhere between missing the point and not possible. I asked the committee to think about it like this. If AI has the potential to cure diseases, design new, better cities of the future, and make travel plans for busy MPs a little more doable, then surely it can generate a spreadsheet or write a bibliography. The second place the bill can go further is requiring the labeling of solely AI-generated images and videos, especially in cases where they impersonate an individual. Right now, today, we are standing at the edge of the uncanny valley with AI. Once you learn what to look for, you can understand the image of the Pope in the white puffy jacket is not a photo of the Pope. But this technology will never be worse than it is today. Every day, it is getting better, and in many ways, more dangerous when it comes to the powerful potential for deception and misinformation. Requiring labeling is an important step towards addressing this. The third is the need to address deepfakes and voice clones as a threat and to prepare our legal system so that we can all agree that the production of deepfakes and voice clones without the consent of the cloned person is wrong. As elected members of Parliament, you know that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation that brings you to this House of Commons. You also know that it takes just one moment for that to come crashing down. Increasingly, this is the fact that people across all professions, livelihoods, and ages are coming to grips with in the face of the proliferation of deepfakes and the ease to which they can be produced. Abacus data has found that exposure to deepfakes is common, and Canadians are worried about the risks. 1 out of every 2 Canadians have mistaken a deepfake for a real video. But it's worse for younger Canadians. 77% have been deceived. 15% say it happens all the time. Canadians are worried about the effect of deepfakes on artists, political leaders, and business leaders, but 79% of Canadians worry about it for themselves, too. and almost unanimously, 93% of Canadians agree there should be a right to prevent these impersonations. Now is the time to strengthen both C-27 and all of our laws to ensure that antiquated analog laws that were once designed to protect celebrities' images from being used against their consent in magazine ads are prepared for the digital realities of today for everyone. Now, some will ask, what about free speech? When it comes to deepfakes, this is simple. Putting your words in my mouth is not free speech. What about parody? Deepfakes aren't parody. They don't mimic with deliberate exaggeration for comic effect. They are done to deceive, misinform, and steal one person's character for the advantage of another. And we should make clear that in 2024, in a digital setting, that is illegal. I thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you. And now to start the discussion, I'll turn it over to Mr. Williams for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your witnesses. This is always an important discussion and great to hear from each one of you. I want to start from testimony today with Madame Desrochers. You had two great recommendations at the end. I'm wondering if you could repeat those and elaborate on both of those. And then I'm going to ask some other witnesses just to comment on those recommendations. I think it was 7.2 of to this act and 12.5 of the Copyright Act.
Oui, est-ce que ça...
Yes. Will you permit me to answer in French? Yes, very good. Thank you for your question. Yes, and of course we'll be able to provide you with further information in writing. These recommendations are in line with recommendations that have always also been made by my colleagues. And if any colleague wishes to add something, that would be fine with me. It's a matter of inscribing, you see, because in the legislation right now, it's stated that data must be saved, but we ask that it not only be saved, but also be made publicly available. Just keeping data registers is insufficient. And we asked that the Copyright Act be clearly referenced in Bill C-27 and to clarify that there are transparency obligations and concerning the Copyright Act and the use of it. Thank you.
Is to want to contribute to that. I think what we're talking about then is sourcing data. It seems to be that that's what everyone, I think from all testimony, it seems to be in agreement that we want to see that. Now, the question is whether that's in the Copyright Act, which are there consultations now, or in ADA itself. So I'm seeming understanding it's going to be in ADA. There's certain parts that point to the Copyright Act, but that's what we want to see. Does any witness want to talk about that or comment on that concern?
Our view is that while the Copyright Act offers a number of protections, when we look at the definition of harm within IDA as it exists currently, it is limited to individuals. And copyright law applies to individuals, but also collectively. And we don't think that the current text offers enough protections in terms of copyright. For right holders, for creators, for authors. And we would like to see a specific policy, specific provision that would indicate that copyright law applies to general purpose AI systems.
I know that one of the biggest concerns is and we've seen ChatGPT's revolutionized and publicized AI and what it's capable of. Of course, we're talking about what's going to happen to creators in the music industry. Mr. Rogers, there's an AI Instagram site called There I Ruined It, where it takes certain music from one creator and merges it with the other. So this morning it was Hank Williams singing Still Dre by Dr. Dre. They're able to take the music and bring it to another. Now this is a parody site. I think they do a good job. But how is the music industry going to be transformed if we don't change the laws, if we don't make the correct changes to the law when it comes to music and the future of music in Canada?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I thank the member for the question. Look, I think ultimately it's very important for us at this stage to remember that the technology that can amuse us is the same that can terrify us. So that site in particular is of interest, and it can make us laugh. And, you know, we may one day be in a position where those things can be licensed. But when those things are stolen, basically, the information that is needed and the data that is needed in order to create that is stripped from the internet and copyright is infringed, every artist that is reproduced in that way has been done so without their consent, without compensation, and is of great concern to us. So, I think it is very important that as we reach out in this sort of first try, that we keep some of those core principles in mind. We know that we wouldn't accept that in any other fashion. So the fact that it's done, rapidly in large quantities doesn't make it any more legal.
Are you then on board with other recommendations that the source be published, that be made public?
Yeah, absolutely. The only way copyright works is if we know what's in it. And so the only way we can know what's in it is if it's made broadly, widely available. And as I said in my opening statement, even if that's a really big spreadsheet, that shouldn't concern anyone.
Ms. Noble, you said you represent 30,000 creators. I'm sure a lot of them are small businesses, local artists who write a jingle for ads, who are creating their own music, who aren't part of the bigger conglomerates. What can we do to protect those local creators? What parts of the Act can we make sure aren't just for the big Metas and Googles and Amazons, but are also written for the local creators?
Thank you for that question. So our members are actors, they're performers, they're in film and TV, they're on video games. So they are very much subject to the deepfakes and the abuses that are taking place. And what we want to bring to light here is that when it comes to actors, performers, we are kind of on the outside looking into the protections of copyright. So we take a step back and we say, first problem for actors are they don't have moral rights under the Copyright Act to protect them to begin with. Musicians got moral rights when Napster came in a couple of decades ago and started stealing their music. Today, we have the same situation with deep fakes stealing the image of performers, and we don't have moral rights in the Copyright Act. So we say that needs to be taken care of right away. When we look at C-27, we also see under the definition of harm, your definition has where there is physical or psychological harm. I would suggest that if we have to prove psychological harm, we'll have to get the DSM out, put it down on a table in a court of law, and we're going to have to explain the condition that was produced. That can't be the level for a performer. Damage to an individual's property. Just told you. We don't have copyright protections. So now we go to the third one, economic loss to an individual. We have to understand is performers are precarious workers. Every day they audition for the next job. It might be one day on set in a series or in a film. Every day they have to look for that job. How are they going to prove they didn't get that role in Law and Order? How do they prove that as an economic loss? We need to have the damage to an individual's reputation. Eleanor Noble makes a living based on what you see here. Her name, her image, her likeness. She caretakes that with everything she does, whether it's business or personal, because she knows her next gig relies on it. And yet she is subject to the deep fakes that are happening out there. Our data is easily captured now because everything is streamed, everything's on your phone, it's on your computer. It's readily available to be grabbed and used or misused. We really need this committee to take a look at the impact for performers in this country.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate your raising your voices in this important conversation, and you all represent incredibly important players and members that are across our creative industries that I think we all are deeply concerned about when it comes to AI and the harms that it can cause to individuals that are earning their living, and in many cases, I think, develop that reputation over many years and lots of hard work. So I empathize with all of your positions. And I've read a lot of your materials and submissions in advance, so I really appreciate you being here. So let me just start by that. I think one thing that I keep hearing is conversations intersecting with copyright. Fair enough, I get that there are intersections of C-27 and copyright, although we know that C-27 doesn't deal with copyright.
And the Government of Canada is doing consultations and roundtables. They've done 7 roundtables already. I wanted to just start by asking each one of you, maybe one representative from each group, if you have been consulted and are participating in the copyright consultation process, because the Government of Canada is looking at whether this conversation merits amendments to the Copyright Act as a separate process, but is not involved in the scope of this bill. Ms. Noble, could you comment, or Ms. Kelly for ACTRA? Have you been involved in that consultation?
Yes, we have.
Okay,
we've
great.
been speaking and consulting on that. I have to say we would very much like to have a meeting with the minister. We haven't been able yet to have that meeting. We're a bit concerned that the arts industry seems to be left out of that conversation, but we have met with staff.
Okay, our intention is to include you. I can assure you of that. Ms. Hanot?
We have been consulted, and that during the consultation on AI and generative AI related to the Copyright Act. However, we feel that much like our European colleagues, we should ensure that there is legislation covering copyright, but it must be stated within artificial intelligence acts that it be stated that Copyright Act as well must be respected. It's important that Canada say that clearly.
That comment, but thank you. Mr. Rocher?
Oui, alors nous aussi, nous avons...
Yes, we too have filed a brief during a consultation regarding copyright and generative AI, speaking for all the members of our coalition. But as Stephanie Hinault just mentioned, we too are of the opinion that there are a number of issues that can be solved in the Copyright Act. Well, actually, we're not asking for that to be changed, given that for artificial intelligence, it's already sufficiently robust. There are, however, certain elements that must be added to C27, specifically regarding the obligation to keep data registers and to make them available to the public so that the public knows what data is used to train the AI systems in order that they be able to provide their rights and be remunerated for it.
Thank you very much for the question. We're talking about the intersection between the two acts.
I'm just sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to know whether you participated in the consultation.
I should have started with that.
Okay, that's great. And then did you want to make a quick comment?
Yes.
Because I'm going to come back to, I want to ask some more questions. This was supposed to be a quick answer.
Sure. Well, the quick answer is yes.
Okay.
And I can wait for you to come back.
Okay, wonderful. And Mr. Roger, was it, I think?
The answer for us is yes, we took part in the consultation. Music Canada shared the position that, of course, the ingestion of music is a part of copyright, and of course, the use of AI is part of copyright, and that none of these frameworks work without that being the case.
Yeah. So we know that there's an intersection here. Obviously, I think Ms. DesRochers, you actually made a very good comment about how the two work together, and that more transparency within or requirements for transparency within C27 actually help aid copyright to actually apply to the creative industries. And I think most of you are shaking your heads, so I'm taking it that you agree with that. So, but doesn't C27 actually make several, and the amendments that are proposed, several, I think, steps in the right direction? Can we maybe start there and then say, do we need to go further? Because I think, from my perspective, in terms of the identification of AI-generated content and strengthened enforcement, that it's made some significant headway. Mr. Forget, would you agree with that?
I think there's still some work to do here. And so just to finish my comment from earlier, and I think it's been echoed, in the intersection of the two, copyright is a framework for ensuring compensation, ensuring for the application of moral rights and so on. In the context of AI and the uses of copyrighted material, we can create a framework for when that happens, how it does. And as an example, one of our priorities is ensuring that the input that forms the basis of material that the AI systems draw from are, let's be clear, they are existing works that were authored by DTC directors and other creators in our ecosystem, as the case may be, depending on the medium. It's important that to to effectively apply the requirements of copyright to ensure, consent, compensation, and credit that we relate to that in AI. So we need to strengthen the AI side of the equation to ensure more transparency in the data that's used, more proactive, we'll call it opting in, where there's consent for that, so to ensure that there's the opportunity for organizations like ours or the individual artists to be able to pursue the compensation they're entitled to.
Thank you. I really agree with your general point. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I wish I had more time to go back through all the panelists, but maybe on a future round. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Garon. Monsieur Garon.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to all our witnesses. Let me begin by sharing the fact that the questions I'll put, much like those put by my colleagues and by Mr. Massé coming up, were drawn up by a natural AI. I think of natural intelligence, and natural intelligence works quite well for us. So that's maybe not be the best joke given the situation. But Ms. Desrochers, I would like you to tell us about non-authorized use of artists' work, because we're talking a lot about compensation and consent. In the view of the public, when it comes to providing access to a list of data that was used to feed generative AI, we have the impression, at least the public may have the impression, that it's just because artists want to be paid, which of course is legitimate as well. But isn't it legitimate of all artists to wish to control the use of their works, to necessarily have to opt in or provide consent? You've mentioned situations where their works are being terribly used for pornography, for example. So what's the effect of all this in this sector? Thank you. It's an excellent question. Right now, they don't have a right to use anything for free without consent. What we're asking for is that that remains the case, that we don't provide for an exception to the application of the Copyright Act in order to allow for data mining, text and data mining. And we're also asking for conditions to support a new development of licensing where rights holders will be in a position to consent to the authorized use of their works if they wish, and if they wish, they can be compensated for the use of their works as well. Exemptions such as that for data scraping, do they exist? Yes, they do in other jurisdictions. For example, in the European Union, unfortunately. But when I speak to colleagues there, they really warn us not to make that mistake, because that leads to a good deal of complexity. Our Copyright Act system is an opt-in system, so we're protected in this regard. An exception, such as the one we're discussing, well, it would put an extra burden on rights holders. They would have to withdraw from the system, allowing for use of their work. So really, that's just too much to ask them to handle. I've been to conferences where creators have said that they have to put hours and hours on internet site after internet site, withdrawing their consent and so on, and trying to fit into an exception system. So we would just like to ensure that there be a license market encouraged to grow in this new situation. All right, you've mentioned transparency. Calling for transparency so that the artists and the market, everyone can make the right decisions. Of course, they need to know what's going on, transparency. Now, let's say I write a novel. I want to know whether an algorithm has used my novel, has copied parts of it, and had access to it. If I want to know whether this is the case, how do I go about it? Ms. Hainaut, perhaps? If I understand correctly, you'd like to know whether your own works have turned up in AI. Right now, our sector is pointing out that the systems are opaque. And as I say, in the European system, that will change, because there are very clear transparency obligations that really favor human rights, the need to protect works, and that's not in C27. Correct. Not necessarily in C27. That's right, and that's an improvement we're calling for. If I were to try to argue hard on this, I could say that, look, AI is, a creator, just like a human. They use material to inspire the AI's own creation and so on. I mean, no artist works alone. And, if an author writes something, they've read other authors' work in the past and are inspired by them, and then eventually will write their own work. Now, all these works that the artist, that the writer will have read in the past and has used in their own sort of creative process aren't held to be protected. So how do we compare that to a machine? Well, look, a machine is not a person. This is software that's programmed to provide certain results. Indeed, the results are sometimes a little odd because it's a machine, it's not a human. And the sectors, the industry developing these machines negotiate licenses for compensation. So those who provide the data to them should also be compensated. That's why there is a licensing market now. NASA's growing. There are specialists who are becoming very adept at understanding text and data mining and so on. So if I understand your logic, you hold that an artistic work created by generative AI based on other works is a kind of an amalgam, an adaptation of the originals. It's a product, yes, created by a machine, but the product could, of course, be held to have infringed copyright, because this could be a problem for the original creators of the actual works. If you yourself read books and use that as inspiration, yes, that's accepted under Copyright Act because people have published a work and they have given it to you and you're allowed to read these novels. But here, there are all kinds of licenses being signed by these artificial intelligence specialists. They're making money on it and so on. Now, text and data mining can be carried out on texts that are in the public domain, yes. But when it comes to an actual artist protecting themselves, they should be able to be compensated based on a license. It's an intellectual property issue. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Garon. Mr. Massé, you have the floor.
Thanks to our witnesses here today. Last week was really interesting with regards to, we had Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta here. I quite frankly was shocked at the fact that we had a panel in front of us that had been fined in the multi-billions across the world, and yet we haven't had any of the same kind of oversight here. And yet they also have the distribution rights to many of the works that you actually perform here. In fact, I mean, to me, since that time, in fact, Microsoft was here. They're being challenged in their takeover of Activision, which affects many of you and your people you represent, because they've now identified they're going to lay off a whole bunch of people of Activision when they previously said they wouldn't. And so the U.S. is taking stronger steps here. So I just like to go across the panel right now, because we have to decide on this bill that really basically moves a lot of stuff to regulation. At best, it's implemented in probably 3 years' time, or we rework it across the board in terms of starting almost over from the beginning. And that's also because the government is unwilling to separate the Privacy Act aspects to this, where I think there's quite a lot of common ground to the AI stuff. So maybe we'll start with ACTRA here and go across. Should we start over, or should we try to still continue to work here? I'm on the fence on this. I was quite frank, I was really disappointed with last Wednesday's. I've never seen a panel in all my years here. We literally had companies representing the influence of so many Canadians that were fined and paid those fines and lawsuits, including to other governments across the world, for billions of dollars. We've never had a panel like that. And yet they walked in and walked out of the room just like we were nothing at all. And they sent government relations people, including people that were actually bought from government teams of the past of government relations. So my concern is, do we go ahead with a process that exposes us to potential regulation that's devolved from Parliament in many respects to be updated, or do we try to rework things and put Parliament back in the front seat?
From my perspective, it's not okay for government to do nothing. across the globe, governments are struggling with this issue. And we do appreciate that this is a very difficult issue that touches on so many different industries, that touches on business as well as people. We appreciate it's difficult. We also believe it's going to be a patchwork of protections that are going to come in. It can't just be C-27. You know, growing up doing some lobbying in my past life, I was always told, get what you can now because government's not going to revisit this for another decade. That can't be what happens here. We have to move forward as best we can, every opportunity we have to move forward on protections for Canadians, for workers, for our society. So what I would say to you is on Bill C-27, we support the intention to ensure that consent is required for biometric information. We understand it's going to start to protect name, image, and likeness, but you're hearing us say, even on C-27, it doesn't go far enough for performers. So we need greater protections within this bill, but you have to move. And I would just say to the government, you have to move with speed.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I want to make sure everybody gets in on this. Thank you. I got that.
It's a very good question. Honestly, I can say I haven't finished thinking it through. I learned recently of this legislation, which I thought would have a greater effect on personal data. We do have suggestions for improving it. As my colleague Ms. Kelly has said, I do think that one must legislate, but it must be an improved bill before it's legislated to really ensure that Canadians are protected from AI. Thank you. Yes, I too feel it's important to move quickly to put a framework around AI. Perhaps the cultural milieu is moving a little late on this, but it's not too late. And we do have specific suggestions, and we're holding strong here. We want to undertake a discussion with you, come up with concrete ideas that will take our sector into account.
Thank you for the question. But just to put a little bit of context, this is moving so quickly. By the way, my answer is going to be yes, we should be moving forward. But the context is moving so quickly. You know, Bill C-27 was drafted before we had the impact of generative AI in the way that we see it now. It was only a little over a year ago that with my elected board, this switched from being in the background to front and center. And I can echo some of the comments that you've heard in our own surveys of our membership who work not just as directors, but across 50 different job categories. It impacts them in different ways, and it impacts them profoundly. This is a major concern. So moving quickly, but making the improvements, and some of which we're happy to be discussing here today, precisely to be able to protect creators, is really important. So move forward in a thoughtful way, but try and do it quickly would be our advice.
Thank you for the question. Look, I would encourage everyone to continue moving forward with C-27 in its original state, which was a framework for all of these other pieces to hang on. I think if I were you and any member on this committee, I would go to caucus on Wednesday morning and go to the microphones and say, I heard really scary things about deepfakes, and we got to do something on that now. And if it takes longer for Parliament to work itself through C-27, that's fine. But I think there are some actions that you could take right now to make real meaningful action to our industry and, in fact, all Canadians.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Yes or no answer from each one of the groups. To start off, before this bill was tabled almost 2 years ago, were you consulted, yes or no?
2 years ago?
It was tabled in June 2022. Were you consulted before that on this bill?
No. No.
No.
No.
I don't mean to be a stickler, but there was a public AI consultation in which most of the industries said that they were not ready to talk about AI yet.
So almost every witness we've had here in this over the last few months was not consulted beforehand. The minister made a big deal about consulting with 300 groups after the bill was tabled. And I just looked through that list, and only one of you has been consulted according to the list that was tabled with this committee. Is that correct? Since then, have you met with the minister and been consulted on this bill?
No.
No. No, you're correct.
No.
We've
He's a
spoken with
Canada
staff. Yeah.
So that's the only name I see on the list. So it's not surprising to me that he got this part of the bill so wrong when he didn't talk to the groups most involved. When I buy a book, or a company buys a book, or I buy a ticket to a performance, or I download a song post Napster, I pay to use it for my personal use or for that particular thing within the company. If I'm a university and I want to photocopy part of a textbook, I have to pay a copyright because I'm using that for commercial purposes. Is that right? I am paying for that right? Have any of you and any of your organizations been paid for the work of your members and artists, writers, for any of the work that's been used by OpenAI, for ChatGPT, Microsoft, AWS? Have any of you been paid for any of that work so far?
Not that we're aware of, but we wouldn't know because we don't know who they've used and what images they've stolen.
Merci pour votre question. Pas à ma...
Thank you for your question. Not to my knowledge.
Pas à ma connaissance.
Not to my knowledge either.
No, we haven't been able to identify them.
Obviously, in the music industry space, we've been through this path once before, and so we have made major efforts to license music in the best ways we can. But in many of the ways that you've listed off, those would not be licensed yet.
So copyright law applies, but they're not paying for that because they're obviously building their large language models on the work of artists, writers, performers, artists of any kind, musicians, but you haven't been paid. But they're making money off of that, off of what you're doing. So is what you're asking for here is that the Copyright Act isn't good enough, that this needs to have some specific provisions about abiding by any input you use to develop like a large language model needs to pay like I do if I buy a book or go to a performance. I have to pay for the right to see that or read it. Are you asking for that in this bill?
First of all, actors need to be given moral rights in the Copyright Act. We do not have that.
Yeah.
Secondly, we need to be able to give consent if they want to use our image. We need to have control over the way it's utilized, and we should be compensated for it. All of those need to be taken care of.
Mr. Rogers, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment on it. You can go about it either way. You can either say there are no exceptions for AI. AI is like everything else, and you can do it in a bill like C-27 and go back and reference the Copyright Act. Or you can make the change in the Copyright Act and say this is the case. We didn't create copyright for the printing press. We created copyright for Dickens and the recognition that their work was worth more than what you paid for it right away. And we extended term of copyright for sound recordings because people were starting to live to the point in which they could hear their song on the radio and not get paid. And so we made that change. So if we say we know they're scraping our stuff, we know that's a use, it's of value, we can just agree now that that's the case and get out of the sort of fun academic conversations about, I don't know, is it a copy? I know it's a copy. I know they're taking it because our stuff is a thing of value.
Thank you. On deep fakes and intimate partner images, we've had some discussion on intimate partner images. Do you believe this bill should make it a criminal offense to do a deep fake or intimate partner image? I'll start with the actor.
And I'll ask witnesses for brief answers because we're all out of time.
As we said, this is going to be multifaceted, and yes, the criminal code should impact and be able to deal with egregious situations of stealing people's images and embedding them in graphic, porn,
Anything.
Anything.
Without their consent.
Correct.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this in that we can, we're here as a sort of cultural industries panel, but members of parliament, if you think about it as people, in music we call it vinyl, voice, image, name, and likeness. It doesn't have to be the extreme example. It doesn't have to be pornographic. It doesn't have to be the prime minister. It could be my daughter. Mm-hmm. And it could be your words in her mouth that she is not consented to. And I have grave concerns about that, and I would ask you all to take immediate action on it as soon as you can.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lapointe?
You have something to...
I'll keep it brief. Yes, I think that it's in the public interest to keep the public safe, and so exactly the form it takes remains to be seen. But the answer to your question is yes, there should be a mechanism that prevents these types of harms.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Forget. Madame Lapointe.
Thank you, Mr. Forget. Ms. Lapointe, you have the floor.
Today with my colleague, MP Turnbull. So my first question is for Mr. Rogers. I noted that one of the suggestions you make in terms of amendments is that AI developers should be required to maintain full records of the data used in training and for ingestion copies. What are you hoping to achieve with this amendment? I want to deepen my understanding on that.
Yeah, so again, because I take the position that of course it's copyright and that's not even debatable to me. I know that people believe otherwise, but I don't understand it. Then in order for the rest of the copyright framework to work, I have to know what it was trained on so that the people who rightfully deserve to be paid for that training can be paid. If I just very quickly add on to something that I wanted to say in response to Mr. Guérin's questions. 2 years ago, when this was science fiction, it was easy to imagine sort of a space robot head learning all the music and writing its own music. Now that we see the general application of it, that it is ripping off bands that you know and love with new songs that are rip-offs of it, or are generating images with copyright symbols in it because they ripped off a photo with a copyright logo in it, then we know that it's stealing and scraping.
My next question is directed to both Ms. Kelly and Monsieur Forget. In terms of intellectual property, privacy issues, and creative control, how can legislation outside of the Copyright Act help in terms of generative AI bad actors? Ms. Kelly and Monsieur Forget.
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of threading together of different things. Copyright is key, as you're hearing us say that as actors. I think you need to have protection on the data that you're looking at C27. I think it's very important for us to look at how it's scraped, what they're doing with it. You need to have knowledge about where this data is coming from for us to even be able to trace bad actors and good actors who just happen to have taken it and may not know. We're looking at things like, what are you going to do with a worker who has their data taken from them by their employer so that they can generate a program, say a training session, et cetera. So why not put something in the Employment Standards Act that protects all workers against having their name, image, and likeness taken without consent, control, and compensation? Privacy laws have to be increased so that we have those protections. I'm sure there's more than that, but this is going to be a patchwork.
Okay. Monsieur Forget?
I think this is thank you very much for the question. I think it's a good illustration of the dichotomy of it's sort of individual versus collective. And we made that point a little bit earlier about the extent to which that we don't think that there's a comprehensive a view on what we would call collective rights. We're in the business of negotiating collective rights, and so we see this all the time. And we also, I'd say, in terms of bad actors, I guess one of the remedies to bad actors is encouraging good actors, right? And the way that you do that is by having order in the marketplace, having a predictable marketplace where, the reason that we have music widely available, film and TV widely available in a way that is affordable and that and that customers can engage and buy it. So that's how you discourage bad actors. But I'd just like to sort of leave you with one thought, and I think that it's relevant here. We've talked a lot about the extent to which the problems that arise with. By the way, one of the direct answers to your question is one of the ways we can discourage this is prevent the dilution of value by ensuring that those players who are maybe not bad actors but are surfing off the work of others, existing work, to create new things, acknowledge it, have the consent, and have a model, and that there's an economic imperative here we're happy we make these agreements all the time, to sit down and negotiate what a license agreement may be, and we're seeing more of that happening, so it's obviously possible. But maybe my last comment would be just to point out the perverse logic that the same entities who are busy mining copyrighted works to create something new want to disregard the copyright on the input, but then seek the protections of copyright on the output. And I just want to point out that, just to get on the record, that humans are the creative drivers here, not software, and that it also, coming back to make the connection between an orderly, predictable marketplace, it's problematic to have material that you have not licensed feed into something that isn't made by a human. I guess the question is, what becomes of that in terms of when I think about the work that our members do, it's millions of dollars in investment creating film, television, and digital media. There's a lot at stake, and investors are going to want to know that they have a path to being able to exploit those works and generate revenue. Sorry for the long answer, but there's many parts to the question.
I'm sorry, but it was very good testimony. Very good testimony. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Turnbull, but we might have some more time at the end, so bear that in mind. Monsieur Garon, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Garon, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Let me move to you, Ms. Desrochers. Some witnesses have come before us to say that to make the environment safer, the environment that AI is operating in, perhaps the federal government should provide a register so that when you have a high risk or high impact system, then the companies should provide the codes or come up with a kind of a risk management plan that they would file with the government. So others have defined high impact and high risk models as possibly being risks to health, safety, and people's integrity, basically. Do you think that cultural diversity should be included in the definition as a risk, and how could that be operationalized? Described. Yes, I think the diversity of cultural expressions must be taken into consideration, and we might think that through. This is something that I could provide you with further thoughts on, but we could certainly think up indicators, ways of measuring the effect of these systems on the diversity of our cultural expressions. Yes, of course, there is concern that if culture is made, in a centralized fashion, is global, if I can say, we'll have less diversity. For example, let's say that here in Canada, we move faster than our other countries do when it comes to protecting photographs, cultural products, and so on. Then that's less food to feed the AI systems. So we wouldn't be as present in the results of AI. So would this be a vector that would lead to our disappearing, basically, our disappearing off the map of global culture if we overprotect our works? That's an interesting question. I think that if all our works were scraped by machines right now, we would still be a minority in all the text and data that would be being mined. So I think that protecting our culture, ensuring that our culture be adequately represented in these models. Two issues, yes. Cultural models, minority languages, for example, in cultures are much studied right now. There are a number of products being developed to see how AI could contribute to protecting and generalizing access to these smaller cultures. We could also ensure in a number of ways that we maintain our space but in the new AI systems, but also protect our history and protect our works. Making data available, look, this is recognized. AI reproduces the domination and hegemony models that existed in the system that it mines. So we don't want to simply sell off all our data without being able to consent to controlling some of the situations just to ensure that Quebec and Quebec culture be represented in the future of a global AI. Thank you very much, Mr. Massé.
Interesting in terms of what we've heard from a number of different witnesses. They're telling us, a lot of times they're telling us to get something done, and then they're also telling us make sure you're consistent with the United States and Europe in some degree. But, I don't know how we do both. But I do want to ask about, because AI, we've talked at a high level here with regards to, how you can be exploited by it, but maybe to Ms. Noble, in terms of, even without AI, I know your actor represents even children actors as well, too. What's it like in the empowerment model now in terms of vulnerability, even outside of AI? So in terms of trying to get a contract, giving up the rights of your visually as well as your voice and all the other different things that could even be captured without AI being as sophisticated as now because of recordings and the things that can happen, and then how scary that can be for the future and how maybe this can disempower more people in the future if we don't get this right.
We would completely lose our livelihood. Yeah. We would just be replaced. Already we're seeing this threat at our heels of being replaced. We have heard background performers being scanned when they're going to onto set, being brought to a separate room and without their knowledge or proper informed consent, being scanned, and then they no longer have like a full schedule of shooting, and so they've lost a lot of work because already they're being replaced with AI and not compensated for it. And this is at our heels. We've already heard the threats in Marvel movies of big Hollywood stars. It's happening to them as well. They want to scan them and replicate them and not have to use them in sequels. So this is a huge threat. We spoke about dubbing and how this is a huge market, especially in Quebec, of dubbing Netflix series. This will all disappear overnight. The technology's already been made, and thousands of performers in specifically Quebec will lose their livelihood completely overnight. I myself have made my living off of it for 30 years. So there's numerous areas. Every threat, we don't know what happens now when we go into an audition. Most of our auditions are self-tape. We send it off into a cyber world. We have no control over where it goes, what's going to happen with it. Those are just simply auditions, and we're not paid for auditions in the first place. If it's utilized in any other way, to scrape or scan or do whatever, or use in nefarious ways, we have no control over that.
And yeah, so I was at a couple conferences in the United States this summer for part of my Canada-U.S. stuff, and even some of the companies were talking about they're trying to fix their ethnic and cultural biases of actually input going into artificial intelligence and how they're building their models. They admitted that there are major deficiencies. And so I guess what you're saying is then that information that's now collected on the artist could then be replicated and used in biased representations across multimedia platforms for generations, and the person could still basically be walking around there. And similar to what Mr. Rogers said about with regards to the artist, that was really interesting, because you're right. When I was here for the copyright review, and that's part of it, was they could literally hear themselves and not, because they're living longer. So that can be also a legacy on the person. And so real quick, I know it's real. When you go to sign a contract, like I know we all sign contracts where we give away our privacy and like it's all mishmash and stuff like that. Is it the same in the industry? Is like artists have to figure out what they're giving up with these long forms and everything else at the last moment? Is that kind of vulnerability out there?
Good question. So just to give you a little bit of insight into the life of a performer. So number one, they know very well if you are difficult or perceived as difficult on set, that will get around and you won't get another job. So performers show up wanting to please the director, the producer, people on set. And so they show up far too often, and they're given in the morning, 6 a.m., showing up for their hair and makeup, and they're given a contract, and they say, just sign this or else, right? So they're given a thick contract. They're not lawyers. They don't have a lawyer with them, but they know the reality is if you don't sign that, giving away whatever it is that contract asks you to give away, you're not going to get that job and maybe another job. And so it's really, they're precarious workers who really have to be concerned about their next job. They can't be the ones who are holding up the rights that they should have in this society. And I would just say, you've heard this, the struggling performer, the struggling actor has to have a second job, often in a bar or a restaurant. That's the truth. They can't pay their rent on the income they make working in the job they love. And then they have to face the realities of being perceived as not being easy to work with. And they sign these contracts, and they don't know what they're giving away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Généreux, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Généreux, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses, Ms. Hainaut, Ms. Desroches. Canadian francophonie, Quebec, is at risk of disappearing quite really in the future. You know, it's a question, really. What do you think? Yes, it's quite a big issue. If we're here, it's because we believe this is an issue. I represent a Canadian coalition. But if we're here, it's because we're working very hard to protect and promote cultural specificity across Canada, be it the francophonie of Quebec and the official language communities across Canada, official minority languages communities, and we must remain on guard. We have to work in a number of different ways to protect the diversity of cultural expressions. And Ms. Hainaut, before you provide an answer, you said earlier that we have to ensure that Canada doesn't become a sort of banana republic. Do you think that this bill is a banana republic bill? That's not exactly what I said. And thank you for putting the question. Thank you. Given that editing is a worldwide industry and we have international partners and often interact with them, I can say that people in other countries are very surprised to see that sometimes copyright legislation in Canada is not up to scratch. It's not moving forward as quickly as it is elsewhere across the board, really. Given that the European directives to protect cultural expressions, and I think this is part of the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, I hope. Anyway, in Europe, they want to protect the francophonie and all languages. Now, in the context of artificial intelligence, it's really important to have good public policy to support any cultural minority. English is a dominant language. It's a language that is more easily used by many, but this is a challenge for English Canadians as well, given that we have the very large competitor, English language, to the south, the USA. I must say that Quebec public policy has really supported the culture of Quebec, and there are figures that show this, the size of the market and so on. We have very good scores thanks to Quebec's and Canada's public policy that have helped a good deal in the book industry, book sector. But obviously, we do need to update all this legislation. You have often referred, many of you have, to the interoperability between Canada and what's going on elsewhere, more specifically in Europe and the United States. Do you think that the bill, even with the amendments suggested by the government, goes far enough in this regard? I think I have understood from the outset that you don't think we're on the right track. Do you think that what you're asking for should really make its way into the bill to ensure that your organizations remain alive and kicking? We are ready to work with you to improve the bill. In our opinion, AI model providers, that be they general models or the large generative models, should all have to follow the same regulations about culture that are applied in Europe. We don't want to have only European French language culture in Quebec. We too want to ensure the protection of our own culture in Quebec. So look, we're really ready to work with AI in a respectful fashion with you. All right, Mr. Bencho spoke to us last week and said that we need to move very quickly to carry this bill despite it's being imperfect. Others, though, have said, no, hang on, because if we bring in a rigid framework in Canada, there will be less innovation, less research, and, all said and done, we'll be at risk. We should take time to adapt, to ensure, well, I'm calling it interoperability with Europe. Do you think that we should, yes, improve the bill, but not in a precipitous manner so that we can take the time to ensure that we align with legislation and regulations elsewhere? Well, look, innovation and protection of rights holders can move forward together, even for innovative companies, knowing that they're in an environment where the guardrails are clear and where it's possible to ensure compensation and consent of right holders. That's to everyone's advantage. It's not in opposition. Now, as for moving quickly on this bill, I will agree with what Stephanie has just said. We are ready to work with you to improve the bill. But we need some help to offer what we have to offer you. Things are moving so quickly. Mr. Turnbull, but Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Turnbull.
I just wanted to say on the US-EU question, on the deepfake specifically, the No Fraud AI Act in the US is a bipartisan bill that our industry supports widely, and we would encourage all members to take a look at it. I think it provides a great framework for the deepfake issue that we've been discussing.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours.
Great to have a little bit more time to go back to my sort of line of questioning. My understanding from reading ADA and with the amendments that have been proposed is that it requires organizations building general purpose systems with the abilities to generate output to make their best effort, right, to ensure that the output of those systems can be detected either easily or aided with free software. That's one. So I think that's a step in the right direction. I'm going to ask you in a sec, but I want to cover the couple other things. It also significantly strengthens the enforcement framework for privacy and requires express and meaningful consent when sensitive personal information is being collected, used, or disclosed. That, to me, covers biometric information, which would apply to all of your actors, creators, performers, directors, etc., I would think, or perhaps there's some exception there. It also requires companies that are creating the AI systems to keep records related to the creation and operation of the system, which may suggest that they've got to keep records of how they're training their system. I understand that maybe we could go deeper there, and some of you would want that. But those seem to be three significant steps to create greater transparency. I want to go to ACTRA first and say, it seems to me like these are really positive steps. Would you not agree that those are very positive steps that have been added to the bill?
Yes, we would. And we started off with our submissions by saying that we're thankful that the government's looking at this, and we're thankful that Bill C-27 has been brought forward. It's allowed us to have this conversation. We do think there are significant changes we'd like to see in it, but we are happy to have the conversation. We're happy to be here, and we're glad that C-27 is being discussed.
Yes, this is a step in the right direction. But I must say that as a legal affairs expert, I was very surprised to read the part regarding generative AI. I didn't see there the key elements that are in the European legislation. I do understand that our legislation may have been drawn up before the large AI generative models and systems became universal, those that are able to create their own images and text and so on. So we need to adjust to this in the legislation. I do think that especially when it comes to the law that you'll be able to access soon, the European AI Act, you will find some ingredients that really will help with the recipe in this legislation so that we ensure that we can protect Canadians.
Yeah, alors pour les deux premiers points, je vais laisser les collègues.
So, let me say.
And make it publicly available. Alors, to keep records is not enough. What do we do with these records if they are not public? We don't know that. So, yes, that's an improvement, but it must be improved again.
Let me just my understanding is some of these AI models could be 70 billion pieces of information. So is it realistic to make that publicly available? I mean, maybe you think it is, but I'm sort of anticipating that there may be some logistical challenges as to, throwing the doors wide open and wanting that to be all public. Have you thought about that?
Dealing with this amount of data, they do. So I guess there's a way of doing it.
Well, I understand that, but it's, as a legislator on our side, I think you have to have some empathy for what we're trying to do, which is to be practical, and that there are companies using AI to do all kinds of great things. So if we make it really onerous on them, that it may stifle some of their ability to do some of the very good things that they're doing as well. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Thank you. I totally understand. I will switch to French again parce que ma citation est en français.
Because I wish to quote something in French. So what I quoted in my opening remarks is drawn directly from the Artificial Intelligence Act, which isn't quite published or finished yet, but that's in Europe, you see, where they are aiming to ensure there's a sufficient summary of the details of material being used and that be made available to the public. So I think that if it can be done in Europe, it can be done in Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Forget. In terms of the three steps or the three additions that I had highlighted at the beginning, can you speak to maybe whether those are positive from your perspective?
Your question. On the current protection provided by IDA, we believe that it doesn't go far enough. And to reiterate the comment made by my colleague Marie-Julie Desrochers, it's not sufficient in terms of transparency. And specifically, to give an example about generative AI, the fact that there is an absence currently of authorizations from right holders to use data for mining, for exploitation, the output cannot be protected by copyright. At least there is a consensus that this output is problematic because we have no knowledge of what the data, or which data was used. It creates an issue for creators, for example, for DGC members, whenever they would like to use an AI output, but also for all Canadians, we believe.
So if I don't want to interrupt you, but I got to just ask, and I'm sure I'm running out of time, very close. Can I just, so if I'm to summarize what you're saying then, you're saying that you want copyright protection ahead of an AI model being generated or trained? Is that what you want? Like, help me understand how, if an AI model takes 69 billion pieces of information, and are you saying that every single rights holder of every single piece of information that may be being put into one of these models should enter into an agreement with the person that created that content? Is that what you're saying?
No, in fact, we do not have access to this information currently of, like we said, of how much data and exactly how it's being used, which means that it creates a level of uncertainty.
But I had just covered that the builders of these general purpose systems have to make their best efforts to ensure that the output of the systems can be detected in terms of, right, that it has to be detected how they've created those that output. So if we've put that in the bill, doesn't that actually address the concern that you're bringing up?
The other dimension that was raised was the dimension of public data and the fact that it can be widely shared or be widely accessible and detailed to the point that an author, a right holder would be able to access it.
Merci, Monsieur Turnbull. Je passerai.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. I now recognize.
May I do believe that the minister's amendments are a step in the right direction on those pieces. I do think that, as we've discussed, they can go further. I am desperate, though, to speak to this idea that because they're big numbers or complicated, that they shouldn't be regulated or there shouldn't be a need for this. You have access to almost every song ever recorded on your phone right now in a licensed legal way because there has been an arrangement between the rights holders and the platforms, and that's awesome. And that was at one time described as not doable, and people sat here and told parliamentarians, do you really want me to go track down the rights of every song rights holder? Don't you know there's a recording right and a written right? That will take forever. And now we have a large, flourishing, legal, licensed music process across multiple platforms. So this is doable, and I would beg parliamentarians not to be, led this path on it's too complicated for you to understand. You must reject that. We wouldn't accept that in nuclear regulation or banking regulation. We can't allow it in the stealing of arts and culture.
Thanks for that point.
Thank you very much. Mr. Viss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just a point of clarification. Some stakeholders, including many of you today, have raised concerns that the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act does not adequately protect the copyright of Canadian creators. That's been well established today. However, Mark Shan, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of the Department, explained to the committee during his appearance in October that the most effective aspects for addressing the copyright concerns are in the Copyright Act, and that the government has announced a consultation regarding the connection between artificial intelligence and copyright. Some of that's been covered. Just so I get it on the record and the department hears it very clearly, what do you think that matters related to copyright must be dealt with explicitly in the ADA rather than in the Copyright Act? If anyone wants to comment on that. And then could amendments to the Copyright Act be made instead of or in addition to explicit copyright provisions in ADA? If so, which ones? Just anyone want to comment on that point of clarification would be very helpful. Mr. Rogers.
Can I just say, without casting aspersions on anyone, this is an impossible game of three-card Monte for stakeholders. Like, the bill before Parliament is C-27.
Yeah.
There is a copyright review going on. If we don't comment on AI and its interaction with copyright during C-27, we will have missed the boat. If we miss the opportunity to talk about it during AI or during copyright consultations, there's a high chance of it being suggested that we talk about it in C-27.
Well, thank you. I agree, and I think the comments from the Assistant Deputy Minister, and in no way a reflection of my personal opinion of the Assistant Deputy Minister, who I think is brilliant, is a little naive in some respects to differentiate that way.
Yeah, I think what we're here, all of us in different ways, and again, I think on AI, the human element of this is actually really important. And if you come to ground on the principles, you can go and change the laws however you want.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Ms. Noble, your testimony in the very beginning was struck a chord with me. I come from the Fraser Valley, and I represent the Fraser Valley and the Fraser Canyon. And there is probably every Hallmark movie in North America has some touch of my riding, the #1 in Canada, Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon. And literally every week last year, I'd be driving by downtown Abbotsford or in Mission, and I would see movies being made. And then the strike in the United States happened, and that industry shut down. In fact, both my neighbors on either side of my house work in the film industry, and they didn't get a paycheck for almost a year. Those families were really, really hurt. And those are good, high-paying jobs. First off, what are actors and writers in the United States saying in respect to ADA? or equivalent, I should say, equivalent legislation or equivalent problems in the United States? And where do we need to find interoperability with American laws, specifically for English language programming, to make sure that our writers and our entertainers and our performers are not disadvantaged in any way?
I'm going to let Marie Kelly answer this for you, but a big issue in their strike was this exact issue. So it affected us, and Marie will be able to give you more detail.
Yeah, this was the key issue in the SAG-AFTRA strike in the U.S. And they understand in the U.S., as we do in Canada, the precarious nature of how our product is held. Number one, so they're lobbying in California and other places for deepfake laws. So they know it has to be the collective agreement, but it also has to be the laws. They're also looking at consent control compensation. You'll hear that in the U.S. as well. They'll talk about name, image, likeness. We need those protections and legislations as well. Okay. I have to make one point. I know
very quickly, thank you.
Yeah, we haven't talked about the fact that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is remiss in our industry. It's getting better, but the reality is your TV screens don't reflect all of our society. When we're talking about data that's going in to machine learning, that's a concern we have to have, is about the discrimination, the discriminatory data that's going in is going to produce, and there's lots of articles on this, the same kind of data coming out, and that needs to be said here.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Hinault, I know you wanted to comment on the previous point. Do you want to say something on that quickly regarding copyright?
Oui.
Yes. The distinction to be made between what you're looking at now in the Copyright Act. I think that the Copyright Act is really a system for copyright holders, whereas the legislation you're looking at for is really for artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence. It's really important to regulate the sector with a number of obligations, including the requirement to respect the Copyright Act. I think that's more or less how I see it. I imagine that in other legislation, let's say on building planes or in transportation, it is stated that there are a number of standards that must be respected to protect the common good. And this is how we see C27, that it must state very clearly that AI developers must provide policies that ensure that their models are trained in a fair and a respectful fashion and make the data available, that there also be policies covering users, that they understand that it's not just fully fine to infringe copyright. Thank you so much, Mr. Viss. I'm really sorry. We've run out of time. And now we recognize Mr. Sorbara.
Thank you, Chair, and happy Monday to everyone, and welcome everyone to this committee. From the testimony of each of you, it was easily garnered that the impact of AI is nothing less than what happened when the printing press was introduced a few hundred years ago. And I say that with much historical thought on that front. And what happened in the Industrial Revolution was introduced when we were able to put a train on train tracks across the world. So it came across very fairly with much emphasis about the opportunities for artificial intelligence in your field and your sector, and also the somewhat trepidation that you folks have within the AI space or within that technology. Eleanor, I think, and Marie, just starting out with you folks, the impact of AI, is it greater on the sort of the copyright side or actually the sort of AI side in terms of generative AI, where you just may not need the individuals? I wanted to get that clarification because we do have a copyright consultation going on right now, and this bill does not, Part 3 of the bill on ADA does not pertain to copyright, but I wanted to get your view if you had to split up the two in percentages or the impact thereof.
It's hard for us to divide the impact of having no work on an individual and their life and having their image stolen and put in the worst kind of material. So, I mean, both of those are horrendous, but we haven't talked a lot about the loss of work. And the reality is there is going to be a wholesale loss of work across all industries. What we have a concern about is we're a cultural industry. I don't believe that you can take AI and you can create culture, right? Individuals can use it as a tool. But in the US, there's already case law that says if there's no individual involved in creating a piece of art and it's just created by a machine, that's not copyrightable. So the impact of this on jobs is significant, on individuals is significant, on society is significant.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm still stewing on that reference to the U.S. Case law that's in place. Now, I do want to ask if we can move on to, I think it's Music Canada, and I'll try to get to everyone. If I don't, please don't take it personally. With regards to high impact systems and low income, a lot of the testimony we've heard as the committee is dealing with the differentiation between high impact and low impact. With regards to the music and arts community, where would you fit yourselves in and why? Like the rationale in terms of high impact, low impact? Because we want to go after high impact, but we don't want to stifle innovation. I say go after. We want to make sure the guardrails are in place for high impact, but we don't want there stifle innovation.
Mr. Chair, I thank the member for the question. Look, I don't believe that currently the bill describes music as high impact. I would find it hard to believe that anybody who spent the last 2 hours listening to us, though, would think that there wasn't a high impact on AI on all cultural industries. And so, I think, again, if there is an attempt to, allow for AI not to respect copyright laws, then it will have the highest impact on us. And again, that's something that you could fix today in C27 by just saying AI use of copyrighted materials has to pay for it.
Okay. And if I can go to Marie Joly, Mr. Deschoré, bienvenue ici ce matin. Je vous demande.
Welcome here this morning. So, Bill C-27.
That we actually finish off this bill and get it put in place because 20 years have passed. And wouldn't you agree that further reviews of this bill pertaining to AI and even the copyright side, which is ongoing, should happen at much shorter intervals?
I'm sorry, I missed the end of the question.
That the intervals which we review these pieces of legislation due to the technological innovation that is occurring happen at much shorter intervals or much shorter time periods.
If I agree that it should happen at a shorter period,
yes.
The review, yes, of course. I think at the speed that things are going, it is probably ideal to have to review it regularly. Yeah.
Mr. Forget, to the Directors Guild, junior members do a lot of heavy lifting. You're the creative side of the world, if I'm understanding this side. How are your members feeling these days?
Thank you for that question. And thank you also for the reference to the impact of the 2 strikes last year on our members, in particular in BC. But I would say that over the past year, there's a high level of anxiety. And so when we surveyed members, because our members do many different functions, starting with directors, but right across the spectrum, picture and sound editing, location managers, production accountants, production coordinators, a number of jobs, designers. And so what we've discovered in asking members questions around their use of AI, their feelings about where this is going and how it's going to be impacting their job, we hear a different story naturally. From the designers, we're hearing a very high level of apprehension. Designers are the people who create the world that you see on screen, so they're responsible for the artwork that's on the wall in the person's home and where the character takes place. Editors are quite concerned about the impact, obviously directors as authors. And so across the spectrum, I would say that for many of the members that we represent, they see AI as being transformative. And so I think that meets the definition in my mind of something that will have a high impact both for Canadians, both for the impact of culture, but also transformative in the way that productions are made. And I mean, one really quick comment, you know, we're used to innovation. We've been digital for 30 years. You know, we don't use film anymore to make films. So, you know, we have been early adopters and eager adopters of new technologies all along the way. So just to put it in, maybe this, you know, you may be right that this is equivalent of the invention of the printing press, but we've had the experience of the introduction of a lot of new technologies that are now incorporated into the work that our members do day to day. AI, in a nutshell, is seen as something different. It is more significant and more transformative. I hope that answers your question.
Merci. My time is up, and obviously it creates uncertainty for your members who are you know, hardworking Canadians and work domestically, internationally, and obviously artistically gifted, if I can use that term.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Garon.
Thank you very much. Mr. Garon, I recognize you. Thank you, Chair. Perhaps, if I may, a quick comment on the issue of transparency. My colleague, Mr. Turnbull, has brought it up, saying that it might be complicated to scrape through or to rifle through billions of data points to find the identity of specific works. I have the impression that machines are able to read thousands of books, you know, in record time. They can certainly search through lists. So, now, some have come to tell us that C27 is insufficient, it's not good enough. Big companies have come to say, nah, forget it, and have suggested that it should be scrapped, we should start all over, amend another of other bits of legislation of acts, and then work for years and years on it. So we have that option of amending C27, making it as good as we can for now. We have the option of waiting a bit and then imitating Europe, Canada being a smaller player, of course, and then there's an alternative to introduce a clause, statutory revision of the legislation every 2-3 years that would force Parliament to look this over at specific intervals and thus be able to better tie into other countries' legislation to remain up to date and to move forward, reflecting on this in an international fashion. What would you think of something like that, Ms. Hinault? I would prefer that we try to do as best we can right now based on the information we now have and provide for some structuring policy, some framework, but I'll think about it. I'm not sure if anyone else has an opinion. This is perhaps the right time to introduce a statutory revision clause.
Many times today, the Copyright Act has a section on this. It is an important opportunity to review and go through and make sure that we are up to international norms, but it is by no means a silver bullet to this problem. It creates like an endless election cycle. It creates an endless lobbying cycle in which this goes on. So these pieces are often useful in minority governments, but it is something you should add, but not something you should depend on.
We believe it's fundamentally important for the government to take action. Our members are already detrimentally hurt by this. I love the idea you have about looking at this more regularly. I don't know that you need to have, you know, something legislated for it. I hope we have good government that is looking at this on a regular basis. It is amplified each and every day. This changes. What we're talking to you about today, likely in a month from now, will have a new aspect to it. I'd like to believe as a Canadian that we have a government who cares about these issues and who's going to continue to look at all aspects of this issue and make the changes you need to make when you need to make them. And I just want to say, you know, yes, we often look to see what's happening in other countries, but I'm a proud Canadian. I also think we can lead, right? And I think we should lead on this.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Massé.
Thank you very much. Mr. Massé.
Mr. Garon is bringing us back to some of my first intervention is the challenge of what we do next, because what I think you've demonstrated today is like the argument that, oh, we're going to consult you on C27 and we'll fix it sometime after you finish, or sorry, on copyright, and we'll fix it somehow after we pass C27 is not sufficient for the NDP. I mean, it's clear for us is that you can do both of those things, or alternatively, we either, again, send this to regulatory oblivion, that's really what happens, and looking at this, or we kind of dismantle what we have here. I'm looking at an alternative where we actually view it through the lens of almost like national security. So perhaps we even have a standing committee of Parliament and the Senate that looks at this and over all the different jurisdictions, because copyright's proving that it's just outside this particular bill in terms of the technicality of it. But the reality is it encompasses everything that you've been saying and doing here in a much more wholesome way than many other industries. One quick question to go across the table here, though. An AI commissioner, should the commissioner be independent and able to find the abuse of artificial intelligence if that is actually part of the law? If we can maybe start with actor and go across.
Yes.
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 Yes, provided we also have a framework for determining, the nature of the abuse we're talking about, and that's where the bill comes in.
100%. No, it's a good point. I know it's real basic, but I only have like 30 seconds, I think.
I liked your standing committee idea better because it gets closer to what I believe in, which is that this is an important first step framework bill, but we will be writing laws about AI forever. So we should make sure that we're clear in that as we go forward.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And we still have about 5 minutes left. So if there are any lingering questions on your mind, I'll open the floor, and I recognize Mr. Perkins.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Ms. Noble.
The opening statement, I think, in some things, the issue of, you called it moral rights. Can you explain that to the committee, please?
Yes, so in the copyright laws, a few decades ago when Napster happened, there was a decision made that they would give a certain level of copyright. So there's different levels of copyright. This is called a moral right. And this allows musicians to defend music. When they have music and it goes out into the world and somebody steals it, it allows them to claim that they have ownership of it. Performers don't have that. It sounds strange for me to say that, but performers don't have it. But there wasn't a Napster for performers back then, right? You were on film, right? And nobody was going to take that film. Now we're out there in the ether digitally, and the deep fakes can easily take that. And the problem we have is that the studios, Eleanor works for a studio and she's in a movie. The studios then own her likeness and her performance for that particular movie. But if somebody steals it and puts it out on the internet and does something to it, she doesn't have a moral right to protect herself against that. She should have that right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Viss, Mr. Viss, I'll just, out of fairness, go to Mr. Turnbull, or your... Okay, fine, Mr. Viss.
Very quickly, Section 33 of the AI bill speaks about establishing a data commissioner, AI commissioner. This commissioner would be granted broad powers, largely outlined in the amendments the minister put forward. There's been a discussion at other panels as to whether the Canadian public would be served by a commissioner who reports directly to the minister, or that given the significant societal and individual impact AI will have on every one of us, that a commissioner not report to the minister but to Parliament directly. Any comments on that?
I think that University Montreal emirate teacher Catherine Régis talk about this, and I want to have more reflection on that. But it's I think it's a very important question that you ask because the separation of power. Je sais pas pourquoi je parle en anglais. Je pense que vous allez mieux.
I'm not quite sure why I'm speaking English. I think you might understand me better if I switch back to French. So I think this is an important issue. And perhaps Parliament must look into it with commissions ensuring that legislation be respected. And this is something we can get back to you about ideas. I look forward to receiving your email. Thank you. And I take advantage of this to remind witnesses that if you have any specific amendments or comments that come to mind after you leave, don't hesitate to send them in.
Question related to the EU requirements. I wanted to clarify, following up from the conversation we were having when I had the floor, whether the data requirements for recording and tracking the data that's used to inform these models, are you looking, or is the EU requirement to have a complete publicly disclosed register of all data, or is it to have a summary with regards to copyright holders? Could you, Mr. Rocher, or sorry, I don't know if someone else is jumping in there. Mr. No?
I'm sorry, I don't have the text in front of me online, but I'm going to give you exactly the clause we think of extract from the UE Act on that.
Okay, yeah,
and
my
I
understanding
think the respect of copyright, it's an obligation to all kind of generative model, even if they are at high or low risk.
Right, but I believe it's a summary, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Rocher, could you answer?
Oui, ce que j'ai lu tout à l'heure, it was
Yes, what I read earlier
Merci.
was a detailed summary. Thank you. And a final question over to you, Mr. Généreux. Rapidly, Mr. Benjo told us last week that within the next decade, there will be characters, like independent characters, if I can put it that way, that will be intelligent enough to carry out pretty much any task, including creating works. I'm not sure whether the creator, I'm not sure whether they'll be given names or numbers, but will they be real creators, able to create culture? Do you think so? If you're speaking of products that are generated solely by AI, in the brief that we recently filed at Industry and Culture Canada, according to the interactions between Copyright Act and ADA, we oppose to copyrights being given to any product that is generated by artificial intelligence. However, we do not want to prevent artists from using artificial intelligence in their creations. Thank you. This has been truly fascinating. Thank you for having taken time to see us and to shed light on your sector, and also to tell us about all the work that you're carrying out to protect artists and culture in Quebec and in Canada. Sincere thanks. You have your hand up, Mr. Garon. Yes, one quick question on another topic, if I may, Chair. I understand that Wednesday we might have been receiving the cellular companies to hear them on costing. I think that most of them will already be in Ottawa to testify at the CRTC meeting in the evening. Our committee meeting is in the evening. Are we going to hear them? No. Unfortunately, most of them, at least out of 4 of them, were not available Wednesday evening. So what I suggested, together with the clerk, is that when we return from a break week, we will return to this topic, and then we will be able to hear most of them. Mr. Garon, if you wish, we can discuss this after the meeting. It'll be a pleasure to discuss this with you offline, if I can put it that way, as we plan our committee's work. Thank you again, and have a good day. Meeting adjourned.